Imagine a place where the clock has stopped, but time is not. A place where the soil is ancient. The trees are gnarled by centuries, yet the faces of the people remain frozen in the peak of youth. We have always been told that death is the only certainty, the final tax on the gift of life. But deep within a forgotten corner of the ocean, on an island erased from modern maps, a colony exists that has committed the ultimate heresy against nature. They have broken the cycle. They have stopped the one thing that defines every living creature on Earth. They have stopped aging. When the first outsiders stumbled upon this isolated shore, they expected to find a primitive tribe or a decaying settlement. Instead, they found a paradise of uncanny perfection. Every man, every woman, and every child looked as though they were sculpted in their mid-20s. Their skin was flawless, their eyes bright with a vigor that defied the laws of biology. At first, it looked like a miracle, a fountain of youth discovered in the digital age. But as the researchers began to speak with the locals, a chilling realization took hold. The young man tending the field was not 25. He was 340. The woman playing with a toddler had seen empires rise and fall from this very shore. The air on this island doesn't smell of decay or autumn. It smells of perpetual, stagnant spring. There are no hospitals here because there is no sickness. There are no cemeteries because there are no funerals. The silence of the island is not the peaceful quiet of nature, but the heavy, unnatural stillness of a world that has lost its pulse. To the outsiders, it felt like a dream, but to the biologist, it was a mathematical impossibility. Every cell in the human body is programmed to wither, to fail, and eventually to surrender to the earth. Yet, here, the program had been hacked. As the sun sets over the immortal colony, a terrifying question begins to haunt the minds of those who discovered it. If no one ever dies, what happens to the soul? If the old never make way for the young, does the world simply stop turning? Evolution is driven by the death of the old to make room for the new. But here, the ladder of progress has been kicked away. This is not just a medical anomaly. It is a glitch in the fabric of existence. And as we dig deeper into the secrets of this island, we realize that the inhabitants aren't celebrating their eternal youth. They are hiding a secret that suggests that perhaps the greatest gift humanity ever received was the ability to grow old and die. The secret of the colony didn't fall from the stars, nor was it a miracle of ancient magic. It was a cold, calculated triumph of human ambition, a dark masterpiece of bioengineering known only as Project Amrit. Decades ago, a group of elite renegade scientists, funded by shadow capital and operating far beyond the reach of international ethics boards, set out to solve the ultimate human problem, the biological decay of time. They didn't just want to cure diseases. They wanted to cure death itself. They looked at the human body not as a sacred vessel, but as a faulty machine with a built-in self-destruct timer. And they were determined to dismantle that timer piece by agonizing piece. At the heart of Project Amrit was a breakthrough in cellular manipulation that sounds like science fiction, but is rooted in a terrifying reality. Every cell in our body contains telomeres, protective caps at the ends of our chromosomes that shorten every time a cell divides. When these caps run out, the cell dies and we age. The scientists of Project Amrit found a way to lock these telomeres in a state of permanent stasis. They developed a specialized strain of synthetic nanotechnology, microscopic machines smaller than a virus, that inhabit the bloodstream and repair the DNA in real time. These nanobots act as a permanent maintenance crew, preventing the degradation of tissues and keeping the body in a state of biological high noon. But the science went even deeper than mere repair. The project involved radical genetic editing, rewriting the very code of the human genome to suppress the genes responsible for senescence. They essentially turned off the off switch of life. In the early days of the experiment, the results were hailed as the greatest achievement in history. The subject of Project Amrit were the first humans to truly step outside the flow of time. They were immune to the wrinkles of the skin, the fog of the mind, and the frailty of the bones. They were the pioneers of a new era where the word ancestor would become obsolete. However, they created was never meant for the masses. It was a closed loop, a controlled experiment on an isolated island to see if humanity could handle the weight of forever. What the world didn't see were the early failures, the biological glitches where cells refused to stop dividing, leading to nightmarish outcomes. To the people of the colony, the nanotechnology in their veins is as natural as breath, but to the rest of the world, it is a ticking time bomb. They have achieved the dream of the alchemists, but in locking their telomeres, they may have accidentally locked the door to their own humanity. The miracle of Project Amrit is not that it worked, but that the creators were so blinded by their brilliance that they forgot to ask what happens to a species that no longer needs to evolve. For the first few centuries, the colony lived in what can only be described as a golden age of human potential. When the fear of the grave is removed, the human psyche undergoes a radical transformation. In our world, we are haunted by the brevity of time. We rush through our educations, our careers, and our passions because we know the sunset is coming. But in this hidden colony, the sunset was a choice, not a command. Imagine a life where you could spend 100 years mastering the piano, another century becoming a world-class architect, and a third learning every language ever spoken on Earth. This was a bliss of forever, a utopia where time was no longer a predator, but an infinite playground. The inhabitants felt like gods among men. Without the shadow of cancer, dementia, or even the common flu, their society reached a level of intellectual and physical peak that the outside world could never imagine. They built structures that didn't need repair for generations and created art that spanned centuries of continuous labor. There was no retirement, no old age homes, and no last words. The desperation that drives human conflict, the need to leave a legacy before we vanish, simply evaporated. They believed they had finally defeated God, or at least the cruel biological laws that God had imposed upon the world. They were the masters of their own destiny, living in a perpetual state of 25-year-old vitality. In this era of abundance, the colony became a sanctuary of peace. Since no one was dying, there was no inheritance to fight over, and since everyone had centuries to resolve their differences, war seemed like a primitive relic of the short-lived past. They looked back at the rest of humanity with a mixture of pity and contempt, viewing us as mayflies who lived and died in a heartbeat. They were the architects of a permanent civilization, a society that would never lose its brightest minds to the frailty of the flesh. It was a world of unending spring, where the flowers never wilted and the laughter of the young echoed through the streets for 500 years without changing its pitch. But beneath this shimmering surface of perfection, a subtle, invisible rot was beginning to set in. The bliss of forever was built on a foundation of absolute stillness. When you have all the time in the world, the word tomorrow loses its meaning. The urgency that sparks genius and the pressure that creates diamonds started to fade away. They had conquered the clock, but in doing so, they had accidentally silenced the heartbeat of progress. The colony was no longer moving forward. It was merely existing, trapped in a beautiful, golden loop that felt like heaven but was slowly starting to smell like a museum. They didn't realize it yet, but by defeating death, they had also defeated the very thing that makes life worth living. The dream of immortality did not turn into a nightmare overnight. It began with profound and heavy silence. In a world where no one ever leaves, there is no longer any room for anyone new to arrive. This was the first and most devastating cost of the eternal life, the end of the cradle. To prevent the island from becoming an overcrowded cage, the biological gift of procreation had to be sacrificed. For centuries, the laughter of a newborn baby has not echoed through the streets of the colony. The youth you see on every street corner is a mask, a deceptive surface covering minds that are hundreds of years old. There are no fresh perspectives, no rebellious teenagers, and no new generations to challenge the mistakes of the past. The colony has become a closed circuit, a biological museum where the exhibits refuse to change. As the decades stretched into centuries, the intellectual pulse of the community began to flatline. Human progress is fueled by the cycle of life and death. The old ideas die with the old generation, making room for the radical and the revolutionary. But here, the masters of the past are still the masters of the present. The same scientists have been studying the same problems for 400 years, and the same artists have been painting in the same style for 5 centuries. There is no new idea because there is no new mind. The inhabitants have become frozen in their own brilliance, unable to see beyond the mental walls they built in their youth. They are no longer exploring the unknown. They are merely rearranging the furniture of their own memories. Evolution, the very engine of existence, has ground to a violent halt. For millions of years, life on Earth has moved forward to the brutal but necessary filter of natural selection. The weak fall, the strong adapt, and the species improves. But by locking their cells in a state of permanent perfection, the people of the colony have stepped out of the stream of life. They are no longer adapting to their environment. They have become biological statues, immune to change but also incapable of growth. The silent stagnation has turned the island into a world of forever today, where Wednesday is indistinguishable from a century ago, and next year promises nothing but more of the same. The psychological toll of this stillness is starting to manifest in a chilling way. When there is no deadline, there is no motivation. When there is no end, there is no reason to begin anything new. The silent stagnation is not just a lack of movement. It is a rot of the spirit. The inhabitants find themselves staring at the horizon for decades, trapped in a state of profound boredom that no amount of entertainment can cure. They have achieved the ultimate stability, but they are discovering that a world without change is not a paradise. It is a tomb. The Ruka is the most dangerous mistake of evolution because it has turned a vibrant species into a collection of echoes, repeating the same thoughts in a world that has forgotten how to breathe. The human brain is an organic masterpiece, but it was never designed to be an infinite hard drive. Evolution built our minds to hold 70, maybe 80 years of experiences, a lifetime of faces, voices, and lessons. But what happens when you force 300, 400, or 500 years of data into a vessel meant for a fraction of that? This is the silent tragedy of the colony, the crushing weight of the burden of memory. In our world, we fear forgetting our keys or a name, but in this immortal settlement, they are forgetting who they are. Their minds have become like ancient libraries where the shelves are collapsing under the weight of too many books, and the ink on the oldest pages is beginning to blur into a meaningless gray smear. A new and terrifying mental plague has emerged, one that only the immortal can suffer from. It begins with the loss of the anchor memories, those foundational moments of childhood that define a human being. A man who looks 25, but is actually 4 centuries old, realizes one morning that he can no longer remember the face of his mother or the sound of his first home. Those memories have been overwritten by centuries of mundane data, thousands of breakfasts, millions of trivial conversations, and the endless repetition of an unchanging life. The identity of the individual is dissolving, not because of death, but because of an overflow of life. They are becoming strangers to themselves, trapped in youthful bodies that house hollow, fragmented minds. The psychological horror of this condition is profound. Imagine walking through a city where everyone looks vibrant and young, but their eyes are filled with a haunting vacancy. They stare at each other, trying to recall if the person standing before them was a friend, a lover, or an enemy from 200 years ago. Relationships crumble because the emotional connection can no longer survive the sheer span of time. Love requires a shared history, but when that history becomes a tangled mess of half-forgotten shadows, the heart grows cold. The inhabitants are not just losing their past. They're losing their ability to feel the present, as every new experience is immediately buried under the mountain of the old. This Yidun Ka Boj has turned the paradise into a world of ghosts. Some have begun to spiral into a unique form of madness, a catatonic state, where the brain simply gives up on processing new information. They sit for decades in silence, unable to navigate the labyrinth of their own consciousness. They have achieved the dream of eternal life, but they have lost the one thing that made that life worth living, their story. The biological hardware of Project Amrit is perfect, but the human software is failing. They are discovering too late that a mind without an end is a mind that eventually loses its beginning. The colony is full of people who will never die, but they have already forgotten why they ever lived. Nature is not a static force. It is a relentless, ever-moving river. When you build a dam across that river, the water doesn't just stop. It finds a way to break through, or it turns into a stagnant, toxic pool. For centuries, the people of the colony believed they had successfully dammed the river time. They thought their nanotechnology and genetic locks had tamed the wild soul of biology. But they forgot one fundamental truth. Life is defined by change, and if you forbid life from aging, you will find another, much more terrifying way to transform. This is the cellular drift, the moment when evolution, denied its natural path of death, begins to take its revenge. The first signs were subtle, almost beautiful in a grotesque way. It wasn't cancer, because the nanobots in their blood prevented the chaotic growth of tumors. Instead, it was a structural migration. The cells, denied the ability to die, began to rewrite their own purposes. Tissue started to harden into something that wasn't quite bone, but wasn't quite flesh. Skin began to take on a translucent, crystalline quality, reflecting light in ways that no human body ever should. It was as if the biological blueprints of the species were being corrupted by the sheer weight of time. The inhabitants still looked 25, but beneath that youthful mask, they were becoming something else, something that no longer fit the definition of Homo sapiens. This was not a disease. It was a forced evolution. Since the DNA could not degrade, it began to drift into uncharted territory. Some residents found their senses heightening to an agonizing degree, hearing the microscopic vibrations of the earth, while others saw their nervous systems begin to integrate with the very buildings they lived in. The Amrit in their veins was no longer protecting them. It was reinventing them. They were losing the soft, vulnerable essence of humanity and becoming biological machines, hard, cold, and alien. The dream of eternal life had turned into a slow-motion transformation into a species that the universe had never intended to exist. The psychological terror of watching your own body turn into an alien landscape is beyond comprehension. They look in a mirror and see a face that hasn't wrinkled in 300 years, but they can feel the other moving beneath the skin. The colony is no longer a collection of people. It is a laboratory of accidental monsters. They are the living proof that death is not a flaw in the design of life, but a necessary safety valve. Without it, the pressure of existence eventually warps the soul, and the clay it is made of. Nature is finally taking its indicam, and the price of immortality is the total loss of the human form. The illusion of a chosen paradise finally shatters when the truth behind the island's origin is dragged into the light. For centuries, the inhabitants believed they were the lucky few, the elite survivors of a biological breakthrough meant to save the world. But as the protagonist digs into the encrypted archives of the founding laboratory, a chilling reality emerges. This colony was never intended to be a sanctuary for the immortal. It was a high-security containment zone. It was a laboratory disguised as a utopia, designed to observe catastrophe that the founders knew was inevitable. The anti-aging project wasn't a gift given to the residents. It was a weaponized experiment, and they were the unsuspecting lab rats. The founders of Project Amrit didn't just stumble upon the fountain of youth. They engineered a biological chain reaction that they couldn't control. They quickly realized that the nanotechnology meant to repair cells was actually a parasitic force that would eventually consume the host humanity. But instead of shutting it down, they isolated the subjects on this island to see how long it would take for the cellular drift to reach its terminal stage. The reason the colony was erased from every map wasn't to protect the residents from the outside world, but to protect the outside world from them. If the synthetic immortality were ever to escape the island, it would spread like a wildfire, turning the entire human race into stagnant, non-evolving biological drones. The documents reveal a darker purpose. The founders weren't interested in saving lives. They were interested in harvesting data for a post-human era. They watched from a distance as the residents lost their memories, their identities, and finally, their very species. Every moment of suffering, every instance of the burden of memory, and every agonizing physical transformation was recorded and analyzed. The isolation of the island was a quarantine, a silent wall built around a mistake so profound that it could collapse the cycle of life across the entire planet. The Matsi Ka Sach is that they were abandoned to rot in their own immortality, left to become monsters so that the rest of the world could continue to die in peace. As the protagonist stares at the cold, clinical notes of the scientist, the horror becomes personal. Every smile from a neighbor, every sunset watched in bliss, was just another data point in a centuries-long observation of a dying species that refused to fall. The founders are long gone, but their experiment continues, ticking away in the veins of every person on the island. They aren't the future of humanity. They are its greatest evolutionary dead end. Now, the realization hits like a physical blow. The walls of the island are not there to keep people out. They are there to keep a biological apocalypse in. For centuries, the island had been a place of sterile perfection, a biological vault where nothing ever decayed and nothing ever truly grew. But nature is not a force that can be imprisoned forever. It is a pressure that builds until the walls finally burst. The nanotechnology that was designed to lock human cells in time has begun to mutate, leaking into the soil and the very air of the colony. The result is a violent and grotesque resurrection of life. The trees on the island, once stagnant and still, are now growing at an impossible, visible speed, their roots tearing to the concrete of the pristine cities like ancient, angry serpents. The flowers are no longer delicate. They are thick, pulsing with synthetic energy that glows in the dark, and they are hungry for the carbon that has been trapped in the immortal bodies of the residents for far too long. The outbreak of life has turned the colony into a nightmare of greenery. The very thing the inhabitants feared most, change, is now hunting them. Vines that pulse with the same blue light as the nanobots are creeping into the homes, winding around the limbs of the immortal, and beginning to merge with their skin. It is a biological invasion that no medicine can stop. The people of the colony, who haven't felt a fever or a cough in 500 years, are now watching in horror as tiny, glowing sprouts emerge from their own flesh. The nanotechnology is no longer distinguishing between the human body and the surrounding forest. It has tried to integrate everything into a single, chaotic, and ever-growing organism. The island is no longer a sanctuary. It is a battlefield where the flora is winning. This is the ultimate irony of their existence. They sought to stop death, and in doing so, they invited a version of life that is more terrifying than any grave. The air is thick with spores that act like microscopic architects, rebuilding the world in a way that excludes a human form. Buildings are collapsing under the weight of massive, iridescent moss, and the silence of the island has been replaced by the wet, rhythmic sound of a forest that breathes. The inhabitants, once so proud of their eternal youth, are now paralyzed by the realization that they are being consumed by the very life force they tried to hoard. They are being recycled by a planet that is tired of their stillness. As the Zindagi Ka Hamla reaches its peak, the protagonist realizes that the quarantine is being breached from the inside. The nature of the island is not just returning. It is evolving into something aggressive and unstoppable. The barrier between the person and the planet is dissolving, and the individuals are being absorbed into a collective, green consciousness. They wanted to live forever, and now they will, but not as humans. They will live as the nutrients for a new, terrifying ecosystem that knows no death, only endless, mindless growth. The price of their immortality was high, but the price of nature's return is absolute. The realization hit the colony like a physical wave of cold, suffocating air. Death was never the enemy. For centuries, they had looked at the grave as a failure of biology, a flaw in the design of the universe that needed to be corrected. But as the island is swallowed by the aggressive, mutated growth of Project Amrit, the truth emerges in its most brutal form. Death was the fuel of evolution. It was a pruning of the old to allow the fresh, the creative, and the adaptive to thrive. Without the exit door of mortality, life has lost its direction and its purpose. It has become a biological error, a glitch in the software of existence that refuses to crash. The inhabitants are now trapped in a loop of perpetual youth that has become a nightmare of stagnant flesh and overloaded minds. Chaos erupts across the once silent streets of the colony as the residents reach their breaking point. The psychological pressure of 500 years of memories, combined with the horrifying physical transformations of the cellular drift, has pushed them into a collective madness. They no longer want to be gods. They just want to be at peace. They want the one thing that every other living creature on Earth is granted for free: an end. People are desperate to escape the golden cage they built for themselves, but they are discovering a terrifying new reality. The nanotechnology in their blood is too efficient. It repairs every wound, counters every poison, and jumpstarts the heart every time it tries to stop. They have become prisoners of their own survival, unable to die even when their souls have already withered away. The Sab, S.E. Batty Bull, was thinking that the human spirit could survive without the horizon of an end. The urgency of life comes from its brevity. We love, we create, and we fight because we know our time is limited. In the colony, that fire has been extinguished, replaced by the cold, mechanical efficiency of a machine that refuses to break down. Men and women who once celebrated their eternal youth are now begging for the release of the soil, for the quiet of the dark, for the mercy of fading away. But the machines in their veins are relentless. They are being kept alive by a force that no longer cares about their happiness or their sanity. They are simply biological data points, preserved in a state of eternal, agonizing youth. This is the ultimate climax of human hubris. They tried to rewrite the laws of the universe, and in doing so, they deleted the most important line of the code. As the island screams of the sounds of people who cannot find rest, the protagonist realizes that the evolution's most dangerous mistake wasn't the technology itself. It was a belief that life has value without death. They have created a world where the sun never sets, only to find that they are starving for the dark. The colony is a living testament to the fact that immortality isn't a victory over nature. It is a total, irreversible surrender to a life that has no meaning. The fire that eventually consumed the colony didn't come from the sky. It came from the heart of the machinery that had kept it alive for centuries. In a final, desperate act of mercy, the last of the founding systems was overloaded, turning the miracle of immortality into a cleansing inferno. As the green, pulsing forest and the glass cities of the immortal began to crumble into ash, the heavy silence of the island was finally broken by the crackle of natural destruction. For the first time in generations, the air smelled of smoke and autumn, the scent of an ending. The project Amrit was over, not because it failed, but because its subjects finally chose the dignity of the grave over the slavery of the eternal. The island that was once a sanctuary of life has returned to the sea, leaving behind nothing but a haunting memory of human hubris. Standing on the shore of a world that has moved on, the last survivor of the colony watches the horizon. He is the last mortal, the only one who carries the biological burden of those 500 years, now rapidly catching up to him as the nanotechnology in his blood fades away. His face, once smooth and frozen in youth, is now carving itself into the deep, beautiful lines of old age. He is not dying in fear. He is dying in triumph. He represents the return of the human soul to the cycle of the universe. His message to the world is not one of scientific achievement, but a warning written in the ruins of a fallen utopia. He is a living proof that a life without an end is a story without a meaning, and that the beauty of flower lies entirely in the fact that it will eventually fade. The story of the colony that stopped aging is a mirror held up to our own modern ambitions. We spend our lives fighting against the clock, searching for the next pill, the next surgery, or the next breakthrough that will grant us just a few more years. But as the last embers of the island die out, we are forced to confront the ultimate paradox of our existence. Evolution is a relay race, not a marathon for a single runner. When we refuse to pass the torch, the fire simply goes out. The immortality they achieved was a hollow victory, a golden cage that stripped them of their creativity, their memory, and their very humanity. They were not gods. They were just ghosts who forgot how to leave the stage. As the screen fades to black and the waves reclaim the last traces of the immortal island, one final question remains echoing in the silence. It is a question that challenges the very core of our desires and the future of our species. If you were offered the chance to live forever, to never see another wrinkle, to never feel the sting of disease, and to never face the darkness of the grave, would you take it? Knowing that the price of eternal life is the loss of everything that makes you human, including the ability to grow, to change, and to truly live, would you still want to be immortal? Or is the greatest gift we ever received the simple, fleeting chance to die?